This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted that Dean Bhaskar Chakravorty has joined me from the Fletcher School at Tufts in the United States. It's a great moment to talk to him for many reasons. One of the reasons, of course, is that the last time we spoke, it was just before the elections in America last year, and we haven't had a chance to talk after that. So many things that I would like him to reflect upon in Trump 2.0 in this conversation. Welcome, Dr. Chakraborty.
Thank you, Hindol. Good to be back.
Lovely to have you back. Let's begin straight away with your opinion on what you've seen of Trump 2.0 so far.
That's a big question with a pretty simple answer, which is what we've seen is chaos, and chaos on practically every front imaginable. And of course, one could go deeper, but if you wanted the answer in brief, that's where I would go.
Let's talk a little bit about this chaos that you described. One of the things, of course, is this whole tariffs business. Now, of course, it began out as this transformative move for America to, in a sense, rebalance its trade around the world. But today, no one is entirely clear, Dean Chakraborty, anywhere in the world, whether tariffs are on, tariffs are off, what is really going on. Is there some leeway being given to some countries? To some countries, the leeway is not being given. What exactly is going on? There seems to be a lot of confusion about that. Do you have a sense of what's going on?
Well, I think I would agree with you that very few people in countries around the world that are responsible for thinking about these issues have any clarity in terms of what to believe and what not to believe regarding the tariff structure, how long that's going to last, whether that's a negotiating tactic, whether Trump and his administration is serious about it. So the lack of clarity, the lack of certainty is a major contributing factor to the chaos. I think what I find helpful is perhaps going a little bit deeper into trying to understand what could be the motivating factors behind some of these moves that Trump and his team have taken. And I kind of always find it helpful to sort of think about what are the drivers. And then, with those drivers in front of us, then try to kind of say, okay, where might this go as we look ahead, and how stable is the current structure and how unstable is it? So when I think about the drivers, I think of three things that are playing inside Trump's head. Thing number one is that he is a person who pretty much grew up in his professional life in the 80s and 90s. He comes from that mindset of the United States that lost a large part of its manufacturing sector and other critical industries to countries abroad, and a large part of that movement was because of lower costs, particularly in countries such as China. So he's got this mindset of bringing those jobs and those industries back by rebalancing the cost structure, and he sees tariffs as the immediate way to do that. So that's point number one. He's basically frozen in that mindset, even though it's 2025. And a lot has changed since the 80s and 90s of the previous century till today, 2025. Issue number two is the way he has always done business, which is he would put up a plan for a tall building. He would solicit bids from potential contractors. He might make an early advance so that the contractors could buy their materials and then start doing the work on the buildings. And then he won't pay them because he's got leverage. They've already invested in putting stuff into his buildings. So he sees leverage as a way to negotiate your way to a better outcome for everything. So that's point number two, which is putting tariffs, a tariff card out there. He sees this as leverage for negotiating a better deal for the United States. Issue number three is he's in his second term. So he doesn't really care about the consequences. What he does care about is accumulating as much wealth as possible for himself and his family and his allies, and keeping the people around him who have supported him happy, so that then that continues to give him not just economic leverage, but also the popularity that he has always sought. He's always been a bit of an outsider, or very much of an outsider in the New York elite, and this sort of gives him a way to build his own base, even though he may not have political aspirations going forward. That's really important to him. So as you think about these underlying factors, it helps me understand why he's taken the moves that he has, and what might that reveal about what's around the corner.
I want to mention one of these moves and take you forward in this conversation, Dean Chakravorty, is the tariffs on China. Now, it began with this dramatic, global order, trade order, economic order changing tariffs on China. Then there was a pause. Then they were brought down to a degree. What's really happening there, in your opinion? What does Trump want out of America's trade with China?
Well, a big thing in terms of what he wants is for him to be able to speak to his base about the fact that all the jobs that have been lost in the United States to China, he's quote unquote doing something about it. He's trying to push China to a point where either they, in some fantasy world, they give up some of that manufacturing to the United States. Classic example being iPhones, as kind of one example, where you just make it so difficult for the American companies to manufacture their product in China that you bring it back to the United States. Of course, these manufacturers are now looking at other destinations where the tariff structure might be a little bit more lenient. So he hasn't sort of factored all that in. So he basically kind of says, I'm going to make it tough for China to be the manufacturing hub of the universe. Some of that should move back to the United States. That brings back jobs, and I can legitimately go back to the base that really supports me, that I've tried my best. I've done what I need to do in order to bring those jobs back. So it's really important for him to be able to say that and continue to kind of feel loved by the people who, quote unquote, love him. I don't necessarily think he's thinking a whole lot beyond that initial move, because, as we know, it's not a straightforward proposition. You can't just jack up tariffs, particularly to the extent that he has with China, and then expect that the rest of the world is just going to fall in line, and manufacturing is going to move. I mean, it's not going to be that straightforward.
And this is happening also, of course, with allies. It's not just China, which is clearly America's great economic partner, but also equally America's great adversary. But it's also happening with allies, his allies in Europe, his friendship, as it were, the great special friendship between India and the United States, and in other parts of the world. Talk to us a little bit about the impact there. It's not just on the adversaries, this is also on allies.
Yeah, so when you say allies, the question is who's ally? So right now, his closest ally seems to be, Saudi Arabia, or some other allies are, pretty much in that region. So when you say ally, is it the ally of the United States? And even how, for the United States, how does one define the term ally? China is an ally and it's a competitor. It's a very complex relationship. With India, it's another complex relationship. I don't think he gives a damn about India in particular, except that India is a potential alternative to China. And there are several connections that he would like to build with India. But India is not the ally of Trump in the sense that Saudi Arabia might be. Because, as I mentioned, there are a whole bunch of things that Trump wants to accomplish in this term. And one of the critical elements of his goals is to actually amass a massive fortune for his family. And Saudi Arabia is much more critical to that than India is, or the European Union is. So the whole notion of allyship has changed from this being a national conversation to an individual personal conversation.
Of course, many countries can't give the president a plane as he received from one of the countries recently, to the great bemusement of many people around the world. But I want to take this conversation towards the direction you're going, which is that, for a country like India, it becomes a bit perplexing for many people. Of course, India's, for many years we've spoken about the China plus one strategy, in a sense that, as manufacturing moves, a lot of it will move to India and so on and so forth. Today, this entire thing has become much more complex. On one hand, people say in India that there's a China plus one strategy. So, say Apple moves from China to India, but at the same time, you're telling Apple that no, you can't move to India. So, do you really want a China plus one strategy? Do you not want one? I mean, it's very complex and very perplexing, frankly.
Well, the whole idea of China plus one inherently is too complex for Trump. So, as far as I can tell, as I said, he thinks about the world in relatively simple terms. So, the simple term is in the 80s and 90s, the United States lost a whole bunch of its leadership and many of its sectors. And that's the reason why there are no jobs in the US, or there are not enough jobs in the US, and people are unhappy in the US. He's stuck in that mentality. So, I think something like China plus one is not something that factors in Trump's calculation. So, to some extent, people like you and others are over intellectualizing the policy moves because you are thinking in much more complex ways than the way Trump thinks.
That's an excellent point, and an excellent point for me to segue into the next section of my interview, which is to ask you, are we also overcomplicating and overthinking Trump's comments, for instance, on how he managed to get a ceasefire between Pakistan and India? Now, lots of things, according to us, happened there. Rehyphenation that no one wanted, certainly the Indians didn't want. This idea that you can suddenly make a phone call and make things happen. These casual comments that, oh, why didn't we take them out for dinner? This sort of a strange idea that all of this is very casual. Now, we don't know what to make of it because these comments are coming again and again, even though there is an institutional pushback from India. And we don't know how seriously to take them anymore. A few months ago, we were being told Trump can get a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Are we really taking all of this too seriously?
Yeah, I think, to a large extent, every time we talk about Trump, we're taking things too seriously. Because we're reading all kinds of subtleties and complexities to rationalize his decisions. And the point is, he's not a particularly subtle or a complex individual. So when one thinks about, say, a Trump worldview, where it's America first, and let's make sure that everything is taken care of within the borders of the United States, here you have a president who is probably more foreign policy oriented than any that we've had in recent memory. And I know that sounds rather odd and almost paradoxical relative to the America First notion that Trump is branded with. The reason why I say that Trump is more foreign policy oriented is because he's planning to bring peace in Ukraine. He's planning to solve the problem in Israel and Gaza. He has claimed to have solved, for at least the last war between India and Pakistan. So he is making all kinds of claims, both aspirationally and in the rearview mirror, that no recent American president has made. So I think it is. Here's a person who doesn't really care about any of these regions. He's largely playing to a base, and he's trying to say there are all these problems around the world, and I've taken care of them. And a large part of taking care of them is by using leverage. As I said, point number 2, look at the way he operates. Build leverage, and then you try to solve problems by negotiating with people because you got leverage. So he claims that, the United States spent a whole night trying to talk to India and Pakistan and tell them to back off. And if you don't back off, we won't trade with you. That's the leverage argument. So it's very simple. You kind of bring it back to that original argument of I levy tariffs, I make it difficult for you to trade with us, and I will use that stick to get you to do anything I want. And one of them is peace. And maybe he was trying to do the same thing with Russia and Ukraine. Of course, that went nowhere. So I think his claims about what he did and what the U.S. State Department did in terms of India and Pakistan, it's obviously hard to verify because there are so many different conflicting messages coming from both within India and outside that I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time trying to parse through it, and other than kind of going back to the simple notion that he doesn't really understand even the history of this conflict. So how can you solve for it overnight?
No, that became apparent when, of course, the U.S. president said that this is a conflict going back thousands of years. Now, Pakistan was only created in 1947. This can't be a conflict that went back thousands of years. I'm going to come back to India and Pakistan and specifically to India, but I just want to segue for just a moment and ask you what you think about the Russia-Ukraine situation, because after those, highly, those images went around the world, everybody spoke about them, Zelensky talking to Trump and to Vance. After that, there was going to be a dramatic move towards peace and a ceasefire, but things have actually progressively gone worse. And now, of course, there's been a deadly attack by Ukrainian drones onto Russian fighter jets and so on and so forth. And things are only getting worse. How do you see this panning out as far as America is concerned and as far as Trump is concerned? What do you think Trump is thinking when he sees things getting progressively much worse in the Ukraine war?
Yeah, so I think this is where part of his bold, somewhat audacious promise was that on day one we'll have peace between Russia and Ukraine, and his basis for that was Vladimir Putin have known each other for a long time, we're good friends, and we'll sit down together and figure out a solution. And in the meantime, if Ukraine wants to come along and be part of the solution, they must accede to whatever the demands might be put on the table. And by the way, some of Ukraine's precious commodities need to be, handed over to the United States. Once again, use leverage to get what you want. Now, the one person against whom Trump doesn't quite have leverage is Vladimir Putin. There's nothing that he can really hold over him, because at this point, Putin has been excommunicated by large parts of the world. There's not a whole lot that he's benefiting from in terms of coming and sitting down at a table and doing a real resolution and coming to some kind of an agreement and give up on so many of his aspirations. And Putin has been playing the long game, and Putin knows that he can manipulate Trump when he wants. And that's exactly what he's doing. So Putin's playing the game that he's always been playing for a long time. Trump has sort of come out as a bit of a chump in this game. And Ukraine sees that its back is against the wall. The United States is not really going to be a reliable ally. The Europeans, they have their own problems, and of course he's been trying to get Germany to amp up, and it's not, you really need the entire forces and support of the NATO alliance to keep Ukraine where they are in this conflict and maybe even resolve and end this conflict. None of that is happening. So Ukraine gets desperate, and they're kind of striking out and going on the offensive. It's not that surprising. I think that's as far as even without being inside the center of the conflict, that's how I would read it. So this outcome should not be a surprise to anybody. Why would Putin sit down and say, okay, let's do a deal? And by the way, why would Vladimir Zelensky sit down and say, let me just sort of give up, territory to Russia and then face my people and explain to them that we basically lost despite these years and years of conflict with Russia?
I also want to take this conversation because of what you just said, also to his claims that he would solve the Gaza crisis. There was this Trump statement that, we're going to build a Riviera on the Gaza and so on and so forth. That's another conflict that's progressively become worse. There was that deadly killing of Israeli diplomats in the heart of Washington. I mean, things are progressively becoming worse and worse. Now everybody's using the genocide word again. Things are getting much worse there too. How do you see Trump sees that? Again, there were grand claims that this could be sorted very soon.
Again, it's the same issue with a different set of actors as we kind of move from the Ukraine-Russia crisis to the Gaza Israel crisis. So the question is, whom does Trump have leverage over? Bibi Netanyahu, does he have Trump leverage over Netanyahu? Not really, for the following reason. People might think superficially America has enormous leverage over Israel because they're funding a large part of the Israeli defense systems and other aspects of the economy. There's not really that much leverage, partly because Netanyahu himself is sitting astride a coalition, and the far right of the Israeli coalition, they're going to break apart if Netanyahu gives in. And if Netanyahu gives in, not only does he lose his seat, he can also go to jail. So he has a very strong incentive to stay exactly where he is. Now, Trump does not want to cut off aid to Israel for any number of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that there's going to be a huge amount of protest from Jewish American groups, and Trump doesn't want to anger them. So there is no leverage as far as Israel is concerned. The poor, wretched people of Gaza, of course, they have no leverage at all. They've never had leverage. I mean, within them, there's a radical group of Hamas. They had some leverage with the prisoners that they have taken, the hostages they've taken, and holding on to them, dead or alive, to the extent that the people of Hamas, those who survive, they see those hostages as their only levers, so they're hanging on to them. And the result is everybody in Gaza, the ordinary individuals, they're being starved to death. They've been, getting sick and sickened to death, and then they're getting bombed to death. And essentially, they're living subhuman lives. And they have even gone off the front pages of the United States because people are just tired of seeing those images over and over again. And so if the media goes off, people's attention goes off, Trump could promise all kinds of things, including building a Riviera, which of course, is a ridiculous suggestion, and he's not going to follow up on it. Who's going to follow up on that? He just sort of says that, and then the news media stays on that for an entire 2 to 3 months, because every utterance he makes, the media jumps on it, because it's a great story to keep repeating over and over again. But these are not real things, Hindol. The real issue is the absence of any potential way in which either the American groups or Trump himself, can exert power in that region. Currently, they don't have any power, even though superficially it seems like they have a lot of power.
Let's talk about the India-US relationship. A lot of people, including, of course, us, we all hold a lot of, we think that there's great potential in that relationship. It could be a definitive relationship, but that always there seems to be roadblocks. There were roadblocks with Biden, and now with Trump 2.0, some people hope that this would be a great opportunity once again. But as this conflict between India and Pakistan and Trump's comments about it has proved, and is proving every day, that things are far more difficult than they initially seemed. Now, here again, it's a complex situation, Dean, because of course there is, Pakistan has the CPEC running through it, China-Pakistan economic corridor through Balochistan, which is restive. Now there are Balochi minerals in play. There are reports that, some American groups within the government have asked for these minerals to be extracted, none of which India is happy about. Now, this relationship again seemed to be, entering a bit of, rough waters, so to speak. Talk to me a little bit about what you think Trump thinks about this relationship. I know you said earlier that he doesn't really care apart from his own, sort of interest, but this is a definitive relationship in more ways than one. American leader after American leader has spoken about how, the India-America relationship is important to, in a sense, balance China and many other reasons. There is also the Indo-Pacific, the Quad. Are you saying none of these things really matter in Trump's, fundamental calculation?
Yes. I don't think all this, again, we're, taking a very complex foreign policy lens on the system. That's not the lens through which Trump looks at things. So I strongly believe his interest in India, apart from the fact that he knows very little about the region, is there's an important relationship in India, which is with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, because Trump feels ostracized by many of the elites within his own country and across the world, and he sees a few important national leaders around the world as his friends. because he sees them as strong leaders, maybe not entirely cut from the same cloth, but he really respects people who have enormous popularity within their countries, and they project an element of strength. So he sees Modi in that mold, and he respects Prime Minister Modi. And I think that is his primary connection to India. All this other calculation about how India sits in the geopolitical universe broadly, or the regional political universe as it relates to South Asia, the Indian Ocean, and potentially the counterbalance to China, that is far too complex for Trump to be able to say, okay, here's how I'm going to work this thing. Now, it might have worked if he had an effective Secretary of State who took on that job. But the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is basically a puppet, a yes man who sits on the sofa next to Trump in the Oval Office, and he looks glum in every meeting, because inside his head, he's probably thinking, I don't really want to be here, but I'm going to be here because, if I stay here long enough, maybe I'll get a chance to be the next president of the United States. So I think that's the problem. I think a useful parallel to draw might be to go back a few decades to when Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India and Richard Nixon was the President of the United States. A very different relationship, where Nixon and Indira Gandhi didn't get along. And Nixon had a very clear idea of South Asia. He had a very clear idea of what he wanted out of South Asia. And he had a Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who had an even clearer idea. So, that is the US-India relationship we should hold as a benchmark and ask, what is different now? And what is different now is that you don't have a Nixonian brain inside Trump's head. Nixon was a student of global affairs. Whether you agreed with his policies or not, this was the guy who really had a sense of where to move the pawns and how to look across the entire chessboard. Trump is not thinking about things that way. So he looks for respect. He's getting some respect from certain leaders around the world. He sees Modi as doing that. I think to a large extent he appreciates the Indian American community in the United States, because he sees them as sort of classic models of people who don't necessarily look for the state to help lift them up. They're kind of in respectable occupations. They seem to be doing well. Many of them are slowly gravitating towards the Republican Party. Many of them, held fundraisers for him. So he has a certain degree of, shall I say, fondness for the Indian American community. As far as the Indians in India are concerned, as far as Trump goes, as when he shows up, if they fill a stadium and celebrate his arrival with pomp and circumstance, he loves that. But beyond that, I don't think he really understands what the needs of India is, and he doesn't quite understand what the needs of the larger region are, both from a geopolitical perspective and an economic perspective. I'm sorry to be harsh, but I don't really think there's a whole lot going on inside that, his framing. It's actually pretty simple. A few different things are important, and beyond that, everything else is over-intellectualization by the media and other intellectuals.
My last question then, Dean. The world order is changing, that's no secret. We've been talking about it for years now, but it's changing in, may I say, more dramatic ways perhaps than most people had predicted. Now, talk to me a little bit, from the vantage point where you're sitting, talk to me a little bit about where you see American power go from here. Post Trump 2.0, and there's still some time to go before Trump finishes his second term. Where do you see American power go? There was the unsteady Biden years, now followed by another era of Trump. Where do you think American power goes from here?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, obviously, a question that's on a lot of people's minds. And so I would be more of an optimist in terms of the future of American power. The reason for that is I think each one of us, whether we are in America or outside, factors in the notion that America is sort of a frontier, rough and tumble country, both from a political standpoint and an economic standpoint. And it has an outsized role in the world. And it'll always have that, at least for the foreseeable future. And Trump is a uniquely, I don't necessarily think Trump is unique in terms of many of his tendencies. We've seen similar leaders in other parts of the world precede Trump and often do things that are far more extreme than Trump. But in many ways, Trump is a uniquely American phenomenon. And so I think many of these issues get factored in when people both within America and outside look at America and its future. I do believe that from an internal political standpoint, I'm a great follower of very few gurus, but the handful of gurus that I follow, number one on them is a gentleman by the name of Isaac Newton. Because pretty much everything that Newton has said, also consider Newton to be one of the world's greatest economists. Now, most economists, they've been wrong more often than they've been right, but Newton pretty much has a 100% hit rate. And one of the things about Newton's notion of physics and physical phenomena, which then translate into social and economic and political phenomena, is that when you push the pendulum too far in one direction, the pendulum's going to swing back. If you don't push it too far, then pendulum doesn't swing that much. You push it too far, it is going to swing back. So I am pretty confident we can hold on to this video. On the internet, these videos don't die. That the pendulum's going to swing back. The question is, along the swing, both in the direction that's going right now and the swing back, how many things get toppled, get thrown off the mantle? That's the thing we have to worry about. And that's where, coming back to your question, when some of those things get thrown off the table, does American leadership suffer? So if I were to say, okay, what could be thrown off the table? Well, one thinks about American science and technology and innovation as being one of the crown jewels of this country. And that is being destroyed. That's being destroyed on a daily, hourly basis. It's a devastating landscape right now. So then the question is, will America lose its leadership if it loses its science, technology, and academic leadership? I think the problem here is there isn't a natural alternative. And everybody talks about China and how many patents it's racked up and how many scientific papers the Chinese have. They don't come close to the real impact of American science, technology, and education. So China is not a real alternative. Foreign students who would like to go and study in a country, they're not going to be applying to Chinese universities. Then you look at the alternatives. The European Union is sort of a stagnant region, aging demographic, with its own challenges in terms of how it accepts immigration from abroad and its level of risk taking. So the European Union is kind of stuck in its own way. What else is left? You have the United Kingdom, an island, out there, which may have a few sparks, but they can't replace, the Americas of the world. You have the Middle East that has, some resources for now, and they're going to be spending money to then jump on the next thing. They're either building crazy cities in the middle of the desert or over-investing in AI. They're not going to be a natural alternative. India, it's a rising economic power, but India is not going to have the political and economic wherewithal to be a displacement. Southeast Asian nations, too small. So basically, and Japan is its own story. So South Korea is its own story. That pretty much leaves us with nothing other than the penguins, the poor penguins who are also hit by tariffs. So I think America, part of the reason that I feel confident about it is that I believe the pendulum is going to swing back. And point number two is there is no real alternative to America. So we are stuck with American leadership, or we should be thankful for American leadership for at least our foreseeable future.
On that very optimistic note, Dean Bhaskar Chakravorty, thanks very much for your time. As always, really enjoyable talking to you, and many astute points about what's happening in Trump 2.0. If you want to catch these conversations, of course, you must immediately click on the bell icon and follow Global Order. And we'll have many more conversations like this. Thank you very much for listening and being with us.
Thank you for having me, Hindol. I enjoyed our conversation.